overthinking, self-sabotaging, overreaction. You know the habit, you know the pattern, and yet somehow it keeps repeating. The strange thing is that most people assume the problem is a lack of willpower. But what if the person trying to change is actually not the one in control? David, William, Pierce, welcome back. And I've recently been digesting Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And the deeper that I went into the teachings, the more I found echoes of classical Tantra, Tony Robbins, behavioural psychology, and other things that I've been studying. All different languages pointing to the same recognition, that transformation isn't about forcing yourself to become someone new. It's about becoming conscious of who you've unconsciously been. One of the central ideas in Dispenza's work is that your personality creates your personal reality. The way you think, act, and feel creates the life that you're experiencing. And if your thoughts remain the same, your behaviors and emotional state remain the same. And your future largely resembles your past. And this sounds obvious, but most of us miss the deeper implication. We attempt to create a new future while remaining emotionally attached to our old identity. We want different results, but continue rehearsing the same version of ourselves every day. Dispenza describes this as the body becoming the mind. Through repetition, certain emotions become so familiar that the body begins operating automatically. Fear, worry, and self-doubt, they all become familiar, and eventually the body no longer needs conscious instruction. It simply wakes up and just continues being that person. And Tantra points to something similar through the concept of samskara and mala. The body and mind in Tantric teaching aren't separate. The body is considered the most tangible aspect of the mind, and the mind the least tangible aspect of the body. Repeated experiences create grooves within consciousness, and undigested mental, emotional energy becomes stored in the physical body for digestion at a later time. And the more frequently these grooves are reinforced, the more natural they appear, until eventually we stop recognizing them as conditioning and begin mistaking them for our identity. This is where the teaching becomes empowering, because if your personality was learned, it means it can be unlearned. If your emotional patterns were conditioned, they can be reconditioned. What feels like this is just who I am may actually be a collection of memorized thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns that have been rehearsed for years, maybe even decades. Dispenza's process begins by teaching us to move from thinking to observing. Before you can change a pattern, you have to see it. Before you can interrupt an unconscious behavior, you have to become aware of it. He recommends entering a meditative state through what he calls induction. This is a hypnotherapeutic term. Moving from the analytical mind, beta waves, into a more relaxed state of alpha, where awareness can access deeper layers of conditioning. In practical terms, this means learning to become less consumed by thinking and more present with sensation. What fascinated me is how closely this mirrors tantric meditations. In Tantra, liberation begins when awareness disentangles itself from the constant activity of the mind and becomes capable of observing experiences directly. Not reacting to it, not becoming it, simply witnessing. The moment awareness can observe the pattern, it is no longer completely trapped inside of it. Dispenza's second step is recognition, or pratyabhijna in the tantric tradition, identifying the emotion that has become part of the personality. Not the symptom, the emotion beneath the symptom. For one person, it might be anxiety. For someone else, guilt. Whatever it might be, the idea is to then ask yourself a deeper question. How do I think when I feel this way? Because emotions generate states of mind. In tantric teachings, thoughts and emotions are part of the same layer of consciousness. You can't have one without the other. They are inextricably linked, simply opposite ends of the same spectrum. So a fearful person thinks differently to a joyful person. A guilty person interprets life differently to an empowered person. Tony Robbins would call this state, Tantra would call it conditioning, Dispenza calls it the habit of being yourself. All three are describing the same thing. The life you're experiencing today is not only a reflection of what you've done, it's also a reflection of what you've repeatedly felt. One of my favorite parts of the book is where he speaks about admitting, declaring, and surrendering. First, you admit who you've been, not who you pretend to be, not the polished version that you present to the world, the spiritual ego that you've constructed, but the real version. Then you declare it openly. You stop hiding it from yourself. And finally, you surrender it. Not to another person, not to a guru, but to what he describes as greater intelligence, an infinite consciousness capable of seeing beyond the limitations of your current perspective. This is the 12-step idea of a God of your own understanding. And again, Tantra echoes this. The individual self is never separate from consciousness itself. The problem is not that we lack power, it's that we've forgotten our relationship to it. The limited mind that created the problem is rarely the mind that can solve it. There's that quote, I believe, from Einstein saying that same thing. Sometimes growth begins the moment we stop trying to control everything and become willing to receive help from a deeper intelligence. And this is a huge part of the work I do through men's transformational yoga, helping men navigate major life or relationship transitions so they can rebuild self-trust, clarity, and grounded direction. Often the issue isn't that a man lacks knowledge. Most men are intelligent, self-aware, and capable. The challenge is that their nervous system is still organized around an older identity that no longer serves them. Many men know they're capable of more, but feel stuck. And I've been there myself. I've read the books, listened to the podcast, consumed the content, and understood intellectually, and yet I still found myself stuck in the same fears, the same relationship patterns, the same self-doubt and hesitation around taking action. And this is the problem that I've found. Personal development without strong spiritual foundations develops a false sense of confidence in external reality. And spiritual development without the right systems raises awareness to a point where it becomes so hyper-focused on the issue, but without the tools to actually create change. The combination of the two reveals that often the issue isn't about something being wrong with you, it's that life is trying to evolve you beyond a version of yourself and you're still unconsciously protecting it. And that's why you're struggling. And that's why you're suffering. The work isn't simply understanding the pattern. It's becoming conscious enough to interrupt it, transform it, and create a new relationship within yourself. And this is the work I do in MTY. So if something in that speaks to you, head to the description and follow the link. So after observing the old self, Dispenza introduces one of the simplest and most practical tools in the book. It's simply the word change, Whenever an old thought appears, say out loud, change. Whenever an old emotion pattern begins, change. Whenever you notice yourself slipping back into the familiar identity, just say out loud, change, and create a pattern interrupt. This may sound simplistic, but it's powerful because awareness interrupts automation. The moment you consciously notice a pattern, you weaken its grip. The moment you redirect your attention, you begin teaching the brain and body a new way of being. This is neuroplasticity, behavioural change. And from a tantric perspective, this is consciousness reclaiming itself from conditioning. The final stage of Dispenza's process is creation. Once you've stopped rehearsing the old self, you begin rehearsing the new one. Who do you want to become? How would that person think? How would they walk, speak, respond under pressure? How would they love? And how would they lead? Dispenza argues that if you repeatedly rehearse this future self emotionally and mentally, the brain begins wiring itself for that future before it physically arrives. He calls this creating a new personality. Tantra might call it consciously embodying a higher expression of your true nature. You cannot create a new future while emotionally rehearsing your past. Perhaps transformation isn't about fixing yourself. Perhaps it's about remembering that who you've been is not who you must continue to be. The old identity feels familiar because you've practiced it. The new identity feels unfamiliar because you haven't yet. But every skill you've ever learned worked exactly the same way. Just like learning to walk or learning to drive, learning to ride a bike, through focused attention and repetition, it stops being challenging and starts becoming second nature. The beautiful thing about this teaching is that it places responsibility back in your hands. Not blame, but responsibility. Because repetition, if created the old self, which means repetition can create the new self. If awareness can reveal the pattern, then awareness can interrupt it. And if you can interrupt it consistently enough, eventually a new way of being becomes natural. The deeper message I found in Dispenza's work is the same message that I continue to find in tantric teachings, that you are not your conditioning. You are the awareness capable of observing it and changing it. And that can change everything. So I have a contemplation for you to sit with this week. What emotion have you been unconsciously rehearsing most often? And if that emotion continues organizing your thoughts, behaviors, and choices for the next 5 years, where would it lead you? And what do you want to replace it with? And work backwards. Consider where you want to be in 5 years and what thoughts, behaviors, and choices need to be part of who you are to make that happen. So if this teaching has resonated with you, I'd encourage you to spend some time observing yourself this week. Notice the thoughts, notice the emotions, notice the behaviors that keep appearing automatically. Not with judgment, just awareness. Because awareness is where transformation begins. And what's helped me is what I call the one integration matrix. And I'll leave a link to that so you can check it out. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next transmission. Cheers.